Welcome, I'm Michael Reel from the School of Communication and Culture, and the sequence today will be that Zhenyi Li, who's out of town, has prepared a 5-minute video on the China the residencies in general and their role in the program. Then I'll present on our India residency, which I was part of last year and will be again this fall. And then we have 4 people who are part of the India residency with us. They'll make some brief comments, and then we can go to questions and discussion. So we will begin with our colleague, Zhenyi Li.
Hello, everyone. My name is Zhenyi Li. I'm the program head for the MA Intercultural and International Communication. I'm going to tell you 3 things about the overseas residency we organize for the MAIIC program. The first thing is that this overseas residency takes place as the second residency for the cohort when they return to their second residency. We select an overseas location for them to experience immersed cultural differences and to discover local cultures or their own cultures. The overseas residency, secondly, is the only one in Canada that we do not charge additionally for overseas locations. It's completely included in your tuition, except for the travel and accommodation, which basically will be very much similar expenses for those from East Coast, Ontario, but as an additional cost for those from Lower Mainland and Victoria. However, the enrollment of our previous learners to the overseas residency, basically there are more interest and enthusiasm from Lower Mainland and Victorian learners. And since 2 years ago, we convert that overseas residency as a compulsory component for our program, so everyone needs to go abroad to complete the second residency and our program. The third thing I want to emphasize about the overseas residency is that we set up the overseas residency in the second year because after the first year theory studies, we like to expand the scope of our learning and also to practice what we have learned in a real intercultural setting. We currently have 2 locations, one in China, one in India, and 2 different themes. In China, we are not able, but we are not planning to learn about the language and cultures of that 5,000-year civilization. We use Chinese culture as a mirror to understand our Canadian cultures. Most of our learners are Canadians, although they do not necessarily live in Canada. But we think that China can provide a different enough situation for us to understand our own cultures. When we go to India, the focus is quite different. It's not to understand the Canadian cultures, but to collaborate with the non-governmental organizations in India and to understand the local intercultural needs. So these 2 locations with 2 different themes. We are now developing new locations, new courses. We probably will go to South America, Peru or Brazil. We probably will go to Europe, Holland, or other countries in Europe. And we are thinking about it's very much possible in the near future to have an overseas residency location in Africa. Practically, we need about 30 learners for each location, and we also need a university or a non-government organization to partner with us in that location to organize local transportations, logistics, and learning settings. I think that's all about our overseas residency. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask. My name is Zheng Yi Li. You can find me in our school website, and you also can ask Michael, who led the Indian location, and you also can ask Robin, our program associate. You're very welcome to send us your comments, suggestions, and questions. Thank you very much.
We'll tell them we clapped. Swinging over then to India, our residency was last November 13th to December 3rd, and we spent the first 10 days in Ahmedabad in Gujarat province. These are both on the western coast of India, and then the second 10 days in Goa. And I'll take you through a bit of each. These are some of the purposes: exposure to different cultures and countries, looking at problems of the populations there, and really experiencing the complexity. This is the first residency I'd been part of in India, but it certainly was a perfect setting to experience cultural complexity, languages, religions, histories, ethnicities, conflicts, everything. Our emphasis in the courses was on use of communication for grassroots development. We worked with NGOs, and the concept of progress was something that we had to critically evaluate, because there are assumptions about it that we tend to have that aren't necessarily productive. Renee Scher, who's here in the pretty orange Indian shirt, took a couple of these pictures and gives you a good sense of just the visual beauty of India. It's our learners. Railroads in India, etched in sand. This is some of the learners, and there's Renee shooting a picture. So we had a total of 31 learners, 3 staff, and we were there for 3 weeks, so it's 34 people. Every morning we were in the conference room in the hotel in Ahmedabad, the Lemon Tree Hotel, for sessions. And one of our primary sources was Ashok Chatterjee, who is a major figure in Ahmedabad, an amazing person, quite a wise and very well-informed person. And the person on the right there, Wendy, is really the key to the whole India experience. She's an expert who spent her life in development work around the world and suggested Ahmedabad and set up most of our resources there. And there are some of the learners. Ruby, you're in there, and Renee is in there, and that was our morning sessions. In the afternoon, we'd jump in one of these rickshaws and head off to the various NGOs. We'd split. Sometimes we'd take the whole group to a location, but mostly we'd split up into smaller groups. These are the places we actually consulted. I'll say a little more about each of them. The Self-Employed Women's Association, Drishti, which means vision, video and radio production, Nomadic Peoples, MAIIC, Center for Environment Education, National Institute of Design, Gujarat, and then both the Gandhi Ashram and the university associated with Gandhi. I didn't know this in advance, but Ahmedabad is the area where Gandhi is from originally, and where when he came back from South Africa, he spent 15 years. And a very rich tradition. It was quite an experience to have his spirit suffuse so much of what we were doing. This is the Self-Employed Women's Association inside their offices. It's an amazing organization that now has 1.2 million members scattered all over India and beyond. And it's people who are self-employed, which made it difficult for them to get trade union recognition. There's no employer, but they were able to do that in the 70s because it gave them legal protections that they didn't have as citizens. And you can imagine the vendors and textile makers and so on in India are an extremely vulnerable population. This is the view from the front of the Sewell office of the street. Pretty typical Indian view, except that the street should have about 50 vehicles on it to be typical. These are some of the principles of the organization. And this is a crowd viewing a public video presentation in a slum in Ahmedabad. And Jonathan Taggart, who took this picture, is, like so many of the cohort, a really good photographer. It was wonderful. We had a Facebook page where we could combine all of these. Drishti is community media concerned with various issues, including ethnic conflict, which is a terrible problem in not just in India, but in Ahmedabad itself. That in the Gujarat province, in 2002, there were ethnic riots. Something like 1,300 people died. There's some deep-rooted problems, and they're trying to get at them with all kinds of educational and informational activities. They're concerned with caste, racism. Caste system is still there. And then the UTAN, which, for example, has worked in water rights for the rural peoples, which is a terrible problem, just access to water in India. And so they've worked to get communities to organize themselves for their water needs. This is an NGO that works with nomadic peoples and pastoral communities, which is very different because property rights and all that, they're kind of against. They need areas where they can move around. So children's rights, women's empowerment, just survival. Then the Center for Environment Education is actually a national resource for India and a very high-end operation. It's not technically just an NGO because it does have government support as well, but it has, it's also got a lot of independence, very prominent internationally. And there is the director, Kartikeya, doing a presentation in a school, an amazing guy, and did a presentation on environment there that was so powerful globally, just about consumption of resources and what happens if this and if that. The National Institute of Design is also an India-wide service that originated initially in Ahmedabad. And so we went there to learn about their programs and how they educate. They have 5 areas that they work in: industrial design, communication design, textile, apparel and lifestyle, and then IT. And then they have lots of specialized programs. The graduate program at Gujarat University, we particularly spent some time with, and that's a maple leaf in flowers with an Indian flag that they did as part of a very ambitious greeting of our people. They were quite generous. This is some of the people at the entrance welcoming us. They had music and flowers, and everybody got a little red spot on their forehead, and then we had sessions with them, quite generous of them. Then we had two institutions associated with Gandhi that we spent time with: the ashram that he founded in 1915 and was part of until 1930, and a university that was founded in 1920. And that is particularly, is dedicated to people who don't speak English and who are mostly working class. This is the ashram. Among other things, they have a portal project of converting all of Gandhi's immense writings into digital form and making it available on the web. And so we met with people doing that. It's quite ambitious. He wrote something like 20,000 letters in his life, as well as publishing in 2 different magazines, usually every week. So there's a lot to convert of his work. This is the university associated with him. The rector, who was very generous and talked with us. We actually watched the film of Gandhi, the Hollywood Oscar-winning film, at this university in their media room. It just seemed right. And these are some of the websites associated with that. Now we leave Ahmedabad and go south further to Goa, which is a relatively famous location for tourism, international tourism, very much more global background, and was a Portuguese colony, not British, the only one in India. So it has a very different flavor to it. And it also was the last of the provinces to be liberated from foreign control. It became especially popular with hippies in the 60s. And the beaches and lifestyle, you can understand why when you get there. We are, unfortunately, perhaps, spending less time in Goa this coming year, only 1 week instead of the 10 days, and more time in Ahmedabad, but there just is there's more substance in Ahmedabad. We still want to go to Goa because it's nice. There are the locations of the 2 places. We were concerned there not just with the work of NGOs, but also with some of the distinctive qualities about the heritage of Goa, being a Portuguese colony and having a distinct identity as a result of that. And I couldn't resist bringing up the quarterdeck, where we had a fine dinner one evening. And this is one of the NGOs in Goa. And this was our final night in Goa. The round tables there are the setup for our banquet on the beach that night, which was really a wonderful event. It happens there's a Vancouver native who works at that restaurant. So language and other things became a lot easier because of that, and it was a wonderful experience. I'd like to just show you this Facebook page that the cohort created, which became a wonderful kind of rallying point for people to drop in their photos and accounts. And from this, you can also go to blogs from that many of the learners created on their own, where they did their own narratives on various themes, which eventually became final papers for the courses that they took, that type of thing. So, thank you, India. It was quite an experience. And if we post these pages, you can go to all of these blogs and websites of learners who were there, including some who are here today. Renee, for example, is coming up next to say something about his experience in India. Okay? Thank you. Renee Shear is actually from this area, lives in Souk, works in Esquimalt, and is a very accomplished photographer. And if we can get himself turned on, explain himself. These are some of his pictures.
Namaste. आपके से हो, श्रीमान और कुमारी जी. So I guess if some of you are going to India, you need to polish on your Hindi a little bit. I just said hello, how are you, ladies and gentlemen. My name is René, as Michael was saying, and I'll tell you a little bit about my trip, and I have some of the photos playing behind, and then we'll have a bit of a question period after. Just 2 questions before we start. Just show a hand. Who's been to Asia before? Okay, and who's been to India before? Okay, good. So there's people that are in the know. So I left Victoria, took the ferry to Vancouver. My wife is a flight attendant, and we've been traveling standbys for close to 25 years, right? And it took me 3 days to get out of Vancouver. I couldn't find a flight that was letting me go to India. So I ended up routing from Vancouver to LA, then from LA flew into Narita. I had a 6-hour layover in Narita. Flew into Singapore, spent 14 hours in Singapore. I hadn't been in Singapore before, right? So it was great. I went to town, spent the whole day in town. And then finally made it to Delhi. By the time I got to Delhi, I was 3 days behind schedule, and I was set to meet up with a student cohort friend. We had the hotel booked, and when we got to, when I walked into the hotel, checked in, made my way to the room, and she opened the door. She goes, "Oh, it's about time you made it," right? But I was kind of happy to see a friendly face after all this flying, right? The great thing about the trip, if you know a bit about aviation, is I flew on the Airbus A380, right, which is the largest passenger aircraft in the world. So it's quite cool if you're an aviation buff or if you like flying, right? So that was the extent of my initial Delhi experience, right? Because the next morning, I had a flight already booked to Amritsar. So I had about 5 hours in Delhi, and I was still working on a book review for Wendy that we had to do on one of the books for the course. Flew to Amritsar the next day, which is in Punjab. It's close to the Pakistani border, and it's one of the most sanctimonious places for Sikh religion. And I knew a little bit about Sikhism because I've lived in Vancouver, and there's a great Punjabi community, but not that much. And quite honest, the Golden Temple in Amritsar is phenomenal. 2 hours after I got to the hotel, I dropped my stuff and went for a walk, went to the temple, started to speak with some people, and I'm speaking with this man, and next to us comes a couple, and they sit down, and they ask me what I'm doing here, and I tell them, and then I ask them, what are they doing here, and the man was an optician, an optometrist, and the lady said, well, we just had a very difficult time. I lost my baby, was stillborn, right? So I'm 2 hours into India. I'm still jet lagged, and I'm at this phenomenal spiritual place. And this lady tells me this tragic story, and I said, well, welcome to India. And I think from that point on, all the way until I made it back, it was just a phenomenal ride. From Amritsar, I flew into Varanasi. And then in Varanasi is the city by the Ghats. So it's one of the oldest inhabited city in the world. It's where you typically see the people bathe at the Ganges, and where in one of the Ghats they burned the dead also. There's quite a lot on my website about it also. It was quite a phenomenal experience. From there, flew into Agra, where I met a student cohort that I had seen in Delhi before, and we went to the Taj Mahal and the Agra Fort. Both of us avid photographers, so we didn't get on each other's nerves if we had to take the picture 20, 40, 50, 60 times. It was okay, right? And then, so I went from 1 to 2, and then at that point, it was too many. Not too many, but too many. And we were in Ahmedabad. We got to Ahmedabad, and it's a dry state, right? Dry province. It's the province of Gujarat, and most of it there's no alcohol, and it's also vegetarian. So it's I mean it's just an experience, right? I'm not a particular vegetarian, but the food was great. Phenomenal time. And the NGO that I spent time with was CE, the Center for Environmental Education. And we went off-site. We went at the edge of the Gujarat desert, at the little run of Kutch, where they have the salt pans workers. They work in atrocious conditions, and you know, although you might be well traveled and you go and you hear about these places because you're open and this is what you study and what you do, when you're actually talking to the people who are doing it for 300 rupees or less a day, it put things quite in a different perspective. We also met with women's organization, farmers also who plant cotton, and one of the conversations I had with farmers was about the seeds, and we started to talk about Monsanto, and then I couldn't believe that I was having in the deep of India conversation about washed terminal seeds, right? So I thought it was a little bit difficult, and I was quite upset actually at the end of the day. But Center for Environmental was really good. From there, we flew into to Goa, as Michael was saying, and it was a big shock because a lot of the experience that we had in Ahmedabad were quite intense for a multitude of reasons, and then you're in Goa, in this place that's invaded with tourists, right? So although the theme of it was globalization and all that stuff, right? I think what we realized is during the time we were in Ahmedabad, for a very quick moment, we saw how we could be part of the solution. And then when we got to Goa, we realized how much we're just continuously a part of the problem, right? So it was quite an eye-opening experience. And you know it, if you've traveled a little bit, you see it, right? From Goa, then I spent 3 days in Mumbai with Thomas and Ruby, and one of the things that we did, we visited the slum at the Dharavi slum, which is the slum that was featured in Slumdog Millionaires. And there's an NGO that does the tour, so the money goes to the right place. And what was phenomenal is that although you know the stats, right, they produce have a revenue of 600 million US per year. There's between 1 million and 1,200,000 people living in the slum. Slum is about 1.5 square kilometers. So it's completely insane, right? So again, it puts things in perspective. And when I got out of there, I said, we are the caste system. That's how I felt at the end of it, because the first thing you see is the recycling that they do with the computers and all that stuff. And it comes from us, right? I mean, the heavy metals that they work with, and the absence of condition. It's not to shift blame or to indicate blame, but it's the reality that's how it is, right? So, and then the final day, I got a great day in Mumbai because I met a guy on the street. It was a florist that was off. It was his day off. He says, "I'll take you around if you want," and I spent the whole day with him. So we did a super compressed Mumbai tour. that you could only really do when you know someone from the place, right? He took me at the major tourist spots that you want to see, plus the places where you usually don't get to go. We took the train and the taxi and a bunch of stuff. So it was really a phenomenal experience. And then that's it. I flew back. So it was quick. That was about 6.5 weeks in total. And you know, if it's something that you decide to do or go, I would definitely suggest that you do a fair amount of travel before, because towards the end, you want to go back, and then there's the requirements of the program also that you have to focus on, right? So it's time to come back to reality, right? Yeah, so that was it. Yeah. You're welcome.
Ruby Rana is part of the family. It's actually from India. It was part of our cohort. And so she was able to visit family before and then take part in it. And gave us kind of a half insider.
I hope. Hello, everybody. Thanks for making it. As Michael was saying, it was not the first trip to India. And I'll start off, I guess, with a couple thoughts on India and India with the cohort. So India, a place of powerful experiences, a place to gain new perspectives, a place to learn about the pros and cons of the human condition, a place to learn about extreme, diverse, and dense populations, a place that may make you squirm a little bit or maybe feel a little confused, a place that I hope will make your heart feel full with kindness. That's my India, and maybe it is yours, or will be yours too. A few thoughts on India with the cohort. An opportunity to get to know your classmates better. An opportunity to get to know your classmates better. An opportunity to get to know yourself a lot better. An opportunity to feel challenged by cultural contexts in the company of those who can relate. Classmates, professors. An opportunity to build on your intercultural communication skills as you navigate new or old grounds. An opportunity to get informed about specific contexts in India in a way that you may not have otherwise done before. And an opportunity to borrow stomach medication from your classmates just in case Delhi belly comes up again. I mean, in RRU, we do function as a team, right? Okay, so a little bit about my experience or my recent travels in India. I have been there 7 times. This was my 7th trip. I love it. It stresses me out a little bit, but I love it. Almost every time I go. Both my parents were born and raised in India, and I was born and raised here. So I'm Indo-Canadian, and I do have the family connection, as Michael mentioned earlier as well, to India. I'll just flip my notes here. Yeah. Okay. So in India, I have traveled, explored. I think I've probably been to at least 7 to 10 different states, maybe more, maybe less, I'm not sure. But I've seen a lot of different, and experienced a lot of different cultural contexts in India. I've volunteered there, and this was my opportunity to study in India, and it was amazing. It was really amazing. Basically, I mean, I can come up here and like explain India to you, but I feel the best way to know about it is to experience it for yourself. I think that's the most ideal way. So if you are interested, I encourage you to go. But if not, we have amazing resources and links and blogs to explore as well. All I can say is that on the last day of residency, when it came to our Roll Roads group separating and going our own ways, I think I see a couple of heads nodding here, but I was one of many who cried. Maybe cried a lot, I don't know, it depends, but cried, definitely. And mind you, it wasn't a cry of sadness, though I would miss people quite a bit. It was more of a cry of happiness, knowing wholeheartedly, I was very happy knowing that in this experience of studying, I got so much more from that. I felt there was a level of personal growth. There was collective learning that was so valuable. And I share this experience with many wonderful people. So in short, I feel very fortunate to have been there. Yeah, thanks.
Thomas Tulliver Smith is here from out of town and ready to share his experience.
Yeah, actually, I'm from Hamilton, Ontario. So, yeah, I just came out here basically to visit everybody out here. I have 2 weeks vacation off work, so I figured I'd come out to BC. Oh, yeah, sure. And, oh, yeah, right in front of me. How about that? Basically, yeah, for me, India experience, like you're seeing all these pictures and stuff like that. But I've been to India before. I went there in 2004, and I lived there actually for 3.5 months about in Hatin, and I spent some other time in Delhi and traveled around up into the mountains in Dehradun and saw Agra and the Taj Mahal. So I have experience there. But I will tell you that going there the second time, that experience was valuable, but it still was almost meaningless in the sense of there's so many different cultures of India. You're going to go there, and you're going to experience all different types of people, different languages. You know, the way of life might be similar, but they'll express it in a totally different way. So it's a very, very diverse community. And the second time I went there with Royal Roads, it was a very different experience because I was a graduate student. I was going there for academic purposes. The first time I was there, I was just volunteer working in a rural area. So it was very interesting to paradox my first experience with Ahmedabad when you were mentioning that, because we went out and I was with Marag, and we went to this rural community and we were living with the pastoralists. And it was a totally different, because they were speaking a different language. I'd learned some Hindi the first time, but now I'm in a rural area and I'm back to square one. I can't understand anything. So it was very interesting for me to have that aspect of the experience. But going to Goa, one of the things I noticed that was particular was the religion that Michael was also mentioning, that it's Christian more there and Catholic because of the fact that the Portuguese had been there. So it's, you'll travel around India, and you know, when I was in Dehradun, for instance, in the mountains, it was a lot of monks. You know, the whole different Buddhist atmosphere that you had there, and you're, you know, discussing different ways of speaking, different interactions. So as you travel around, you get complete different religions, languages, perspectives, landscapes, everything. It's almost like Canada, actually, when you compare sort of the geographic aspect of it that way. But for me, it's very valuable, totally amazing thing. It changed my life in the sense of I was a high school student when I went the first time. I ended up going to university and deciding, you know what, I learned Hindi, I love language, so I got my undergrad in linguistics. And then now I'm here. So it totally recalibrated my mind. I was like a big time athlete before that. And then I was like, you know, I'm taking on the more social side of things now. I'm getting interested in that. So it can totally restructure your way of thinking, your perspective on your own home life and the way you see your family. I come from a very, very mixed ethnic background. It would take me 5 minutes to even try to explain that to you. So for me, it was very interesting to get confused in a different atmosphere, but also feel at home in a way, because my whole life at home is very confusing. So yeah, that was definitely a very valuable part of it. And the last thing I would say is that when, you know, when everybody, she was talking about everybody crying at the end, is that, yeah, you make really strong relationships with people. And with yourself, you understand your own limitations, your own abilities, your own strengths and weaknesses. And yeah, you come home and you feel that much more enlightened about things. So it's very interesting to come and present to you, because you have to experience it yourself. But at the same time, you know, listening to us in different perspectives, you can see that you'll digest things in a totally different way. So yeah, and the Royal Roads offering is great too. You go to Ahmedabad and it's totally different than Goa, but at the same time, you have that academic background and that security. So I definitely recommend, you know, if you can go to India, I say do it 100%.
And Don Fulton has made the long trek from Nanaimo to be with us.
Hi. I went about 2 weeks early with my husband, and it was a place that my husband has always wanted to go to. And digging around a little bit in my family history, I knew, but I wasn't really all that aware. I have a relative that was married in India and had something like 18 children, and 13 of them were born in India. and some of them died there, so I have dead relatives in India. And my husband's great-grandfather and his grandfather was born in India, and his great-grandfather worked in India. They both worked in the railroad. So it's kind of interesting. If you look a little bit more into your family, you never know what you might find. One of the things that I worried about a little bit was just how many people, you know, the traffic and the people. I've been to China before. I knew that it was going to be busy, but I didn't know if people were going to be friendly or not either. And so when we arrived in Delhi, I got into this beautiful airport and walked out, and it was a whole other world. And we looked around, and it was very hazy and everything. And my husband said, you know, there's a lot of pollution. Oh, no, ma'am, the fellow said, it's Delhi's a green city. This is just fog. It burns off. And so we thought, okay, well, we're from BC, Canada. This doesn't look like fog to us. But needless to, I can't even begin to explain the culture shock and arriving in Delhi, how busy it was, and some of the places we went. I literally, it felt like I didn't know how to walk or go anywhere anymore, because there was just noise and smell and everything all around me. And these not all the noises are bad, and not all the smells are good. And you know, you take a step and everything changes. Well, I realized that in Canada we live very much straightforward, a little bit of peripheral vision. We're not really used to this complete sensory experience. And it can be too much at times, but when you come back, it's such an amazing feeling. My husband said, he kept saying to me, I feel so alive. I feel so much more alive, you know, and it really takes a while for that to sink in. And you begin to realize that we don't spend a lot of time aware of other people and other things around us because we don't have to. We're just kind of, a lot of us are going on automatic pilot. And it's really nice to be awakened to how much more there is to experience and how much more there is to know about yourself and about the world and about everybody that we live with. And the people in India are amazing. That was a really pleasurable experience. However diverse it is, I never felt like I was unsafe. It was really, really amazing. I would encourage you to go.
Thanks. We have a few minutes for questions. Before we do that, I want to thank Robin, who has put a tremendous amount of work into setting up everything to do with this. And also I want to acknowledge the role that Zhenyi has played in creating our MA in Intercultural International Communication, and Matt, who also played a major role in creating it, and Philip Vanini, who was director of the program head for that for 3 years, and they kind of created the system of the international residencies. Questions, comments, observations?
Could you comment on the academic piece? I didn't hear something about. I know that it's an intense personal experience, but in terms of academic, as you say, designing a program and actually carrying it out, what types of activities and things were you able to accomplish in India as opposed to?
The assignments tended to be a couple of kinds. There was supervised field study, and each learner did a specific research project. With Philip's influence, there was a lot of ethnographic emphasis, and particularly on the senses, which in India is a very smart thing to do because there's so much sensory richness. You can see the pictures and from the comments. And so there were ethnographic reports from each. There were also, then we required public presentations when they got back. Presentations to, it could be their fellow workers, to a public group, an organization they were a member of, and a report on that, because we wanted to make sure that they digested and were able to pass on this. And the focus of then the content of the work there was about using developments, using communication at the grassroots level for development of communities. And the class sessions were about that, and the NGOs were then the field examples of it. Is that any relates to what you're saying?
You had, say, 2 classes that people were taking during the...
Yes, we did. In this case, we had 2. There were, in the pre-res, there were some assignments to get them ready for it, some readings and so on. There's so much more we'd like to do, but it's limited time and they're busy. And then the sessions, and I would say that personally, I expected to have an interesting time in India. It was much, much more interesting than I ever anticipated. Just the richness of the experience. For example, that each of the groups worked with different NGOs meant when we came back and did the reports, and we had people from the NGOs at our summary session, it was like you were able to go on 6 different field experiences, not just one. So it was so much more than like the typical tourist experience of your own experience, period. We were really able to share very, very deeply. And then things like the Facebook page and so on, where people were debating things, complaining about things, exchanging, and then there were such rich, people were constructing their blogs on the go, and so those were things to keep up with, and people were making reports back home. It was a very lively and satisfying experience. Yeah.
One thing that really struck me is that, I don't know if you've heard of participatory development before, but the importance of context, the importance of understanding that people in an area that have lived there for a long time, they know what they need, they know what they want to do, and respecting that and learning not how to come in as an expert, but to listen to them and to assist is so big. And this is something that we can really apply to our own experience in Canada. Indigenous and non-Indigenous relations are a key issue. If you look at Attawapiskat, we need to have participatory development. We need communication for development in Canada.
So I guess if you're going to have one thing to that too that's really interesting is that when you're saying about being experts is that they know what they need. But what's really interesting too is that your version of the Western sort of perspective development is completely not how they see it, and they even don't use development often to make that terminology. They'll say prosperity or equal living, livelihood.
Yeah.
They don't look at it as getting better. As
We look at progress.
Yes. Other comments, questions? I found along that line that, for example, Nafisa, who runs Bhutan, was describing how when they went out to the coastal communities to work on water access to people who, if you can't get water, and they have wells, but they're community wells, and they're often dry, and they compete for the water. And they'll even lower their daughter down into the well with a bucket, and they'll scrape what water they can out of the bucket. The conditions are terrible. Nafisa was pointing out that when they went to those communities to work with them to organize, they were careful to walk in, because if they drove in, the people would know they could anytime drive out. But by walking in, and they became a part of the community, and people really noticed things like that. Amazing. Well, is there any other comments that anyone wishes to make at this point? I want to thank you for your attention, and I'm eager to hear about the experiences of other international residencies because we stand to learn a lot from each other. How we do these. For example, our China and India residencies are quite different, as Zenyi kind of pointed out in that opening. The emphasis, the focus. This fall we have one of each. Whether we'll be able to continue so many is a big question. But one of the things I wanted to do this for was so that the staff who have put so much work into these residencies could share some of the benefits of it and see what those of us who got to go were able to do. And I want to thank Renee, Ruby, Thomas, and Dawn especially for being here to represent the actual experience that learners had in this. Okay? Thanks very much.